just to give you a brief history, the background of Trout Springs. We bought our property in 1983 as a horse ranch. We discovered soon after that we had bought it that we had an artesian well on the property. And so I opened up this valve and all this water comes flying out and it's like, what's that? 500,000 trout later, we're in the trout business. And so now we're producing trout, we're raising trout, and it's all been an evolution. So when the horses passed on in 1995, we decided to plant a vineyard. Okay, now we're kind of pioneers at this point, and people are driving by going, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm planting wine grapes. And they're like, grapes don't grow here, are you silly? And now they buy the wine, of course. And so, I mean, it's just evolved over time, certainly. And along about that time, we decided to, plant the vineyard, build the winery. We built it from scratch. It took 10 years, basically, to put everything together. And so, it took some time and patience, and a lot of money was heading south. And so, along about 2005, we decided to open the doors at Trout Springs. And I thought at that point, what's going to grow this industry? Because, having a winery is one thing, but having many wineries, okay, that's a destination now. Okay, so it was important to have a group. And so I thought, what can I do? And so I decided one cold December day to start working on establishing a new AVA for Northeast Wisconsin. An AVA, you might ask, what is an AVA? An AVA is an American viticultural area, okay? It's got to be a delineated area that makes it very special, set apart from everything else that's out there. I embarked on this basically in 2005. After about 4 or 5 years of really, this was a struggle. It took me 7 years. But along about the third or fourth year, we got involved with Eric Fowle and his people at NERN. They certainly helped me put the polish on this, do the mapping, and really put it together. And in April of 23rd of 2012, we were given that designation as the 203rd AVA in the United States. We actually are the 12th largest AVA in the United States. So you can see that it's a large mass of land. It encompasses almost 2.5 million acres worth of land. It stretches from the tip of the Door Peninsula, and you can see it heads all the way down to Port Washington area, straight across, and incorporates a huge area of land. Now, anytime you talk with the federal government, as you might well know, things go very slowly, okay? And if for everything you say, you better have substantiation behind it. So if I say, well, the weather's warmer, well, forget that. You have to make sure that you present evidence that the weather is warmer, just like everything that you say to them. So what do they look for? They look for soil, they look for climate, they look for a multitude of things that make this a different area, and that's why they give you that designation. And so we look at the Great Arc that stretches basically from the northern part of Illinois all the way up, of course, through the Door, around through Michigan and through Turbomora here, and then down into the Finger Lakes area. So it's a huge landmass that we based this AVA upon. So that obviously it's the Niagara Escarpment, right? And it's an ancient body. It's been here for millions of years, so it's something that the government could not dispute. Okay, it's been here a while, so they kind of accepted that one. Of course, we have certain bedrock and geology that's involved with the Niagara Escarpment, and part of that is the limestone, right? Grapes happen to like limestone, okay? Grapes send down their roots down 20 feet, and they search for water, and they search for minerals and all kinds of good things, and they love getting down into that limestone. And what it does is it actually sets apart our winemaking skills with other parts of the country, because our wines have a certain amount of minerality to them, which sets them apart, and it really gives that a distinctive flavor. And so as you look at the slide, you can see the cliff face all the way up and down, and certainly the number of counties that are involved, within that AVA designation. Our soils in northeast Wisconsin are typically made up of glacial till. And so the one thing about grapes, they love the worst soil you can possibly think of, okay? And part of this, I've learned, by trial and error, because the first time we started raising grapes, I was kind of a pioneer, obviously, and people would tell you, yeah, they'll grow there. Well, guess what? I'm dumping on fertilizer, and I'm dumping on all kinds of stuff, and I had this lush, green, beautiful vines and no fruit. I'm like, what the hell? What am I doing wrong? And so I did a little more research, and I just kept looking and looking, and I found out that grapes happen not to like wet feet. And so we had to tile out the whole vineyard, basically, and that was the changing point of it all. And so you learn as you go, certainly, but we have good soil for growing grapes, which is poor soil. Okay, so that's the key. If you have poor soil like you may have up here, plant a grape. It's going to grow. Okay, you got to really try to kill a grape. You really do. Some of the things that are important, again, with the AVA is the marine influence. We typically have 14 to 15 to 16 mile an hour winds, which is good for the undertrellis, because the undertrellis of a grape does not like competition. So you want to keep that clean so you have nice airflow. You want to make sure that no mold and mildew starts to grow on the grapes, and that's important. And so good airflow is very important, along with the certain lake effects that we have. The lakes surrounding us, obviously, are on basically three sides. We have Lake Winnebago, we have the Green Bay, and then, of course, Lake Michigan. And so that acts as a heat sink. That's a good thing, because things react very slowly. Okay, one thing about grapes, they can take the cold, they can take the hot, but don't have it really warm one day and then freezing the next, because what happens is the sap rises up in the vine when it starts to wake up, and all of a sudden if you get a really hard frost, it explodes. And then you're done for that year. So that's a hard thing to accept, but that happens. And so we trick our grapes into not waking up so soon. So we leave some extra suckers on the bottom. And so they're not real pretty like the California typical grape vineyard that you see. Because if I just have one trunk coming up and we get a bad year, guess what? I might lose the whole crop. So we have extra suckers coming up, so that takes that plant longer to wake up. Once we know that we're safe, then we cut all those suckers off, and then we go on our happy way. So there's things certainly that you can do, in a site that's not quite perfect for raising grapes. We talked about the condensation and the fog that happens. We've got some good fog going on today. Some of our fog comes from the karst that's in the ground. So let's just say on a day that might be kind of iffy, where it's really cold in the morning, but it's foggy, just that little bit of fog might just be enough to protect that plant from freezing, because it acts like, have you ever left your refrigerator door open? You get a little bit of moisture on it, yes? And so that little bit of moisture sometimes just might be enough to make it not freeze. So again, all these little minute things that we have, we take them for granted, right? We take it for granted. But that's just enough sometimes to make it work. So one of the things I had to do was look at our growing season. And you can see that we have typically between 150 and 170 days of growing season, based on a 32-degree mean base. It varies some years, obviously, but for the average, it's enough for us. And talking with some of you guys during this conference about what kind of climatological conditions you have right here, it sounds like you have the same. We're about a 5B, okay? You sound like you're at least a 5B or possibly a 6. So it sounds like you could probably do grapes here. You could certainly do French American hybrids. Again, when you talk to the government, you have to provide data to back it up, yes? And so I went back into the history of the climatological data for the last 125 years to show that this is not just a recent phenomena that just happened yesterday. Okay, this has been happening for a long, long time. And what's interesting, and I think one of the key things to getting this AVA pushed through, was to look at the average annual temperature on the east side of the state and the west side of the state, i.e. east side meaning northeast Wisconsin, Wisconsin Ledge, and the west side, okay? When you look at that, that number is less than 1 degree, right? You see that at the end, 44.6 degrees? You look at the other one, 44.1, see that? But look outside the box, okay? Look at the first 3 months of east Wisconsin, i.e. Wisconsin Ledge, and look at the other side, the west side. See the difference? When you look at the first 3 months and you look at the last 3 months, you get a cumulative effect of at least 10 degrees difference. That makes all the difference in the world in your growing season. So in just comparing a number of stations all the way up and down from the top of the door to down near Port Washington, just 90 miles away, we are 10 degrees cumulatively warmer during those months, okay? Which translates into 44-degree longer days for growing, which translates into longer hang time. Okay, so that makes the difference. That's huge. No one really has ever looked at that part of it before, but I think that was a very good part of driving home, you know, that part of the petition. If you look at the landscape potential, certainly the bedrock, I'm not going to talk about rocks. We've talked enough about rocks. Unless you like wine on the rocks, I'm not talking about rocks. Okay, we're talking about wine. Anybody drink wine? Okay, I think I'm in the right spot. But in any case, so there's potential, right? There's some good potential for the landscape, and you've heard the word terroir. Have you ever? Okay, so terroir is what the grapes are growing in. They uptake those nutrients that are in the soil, right? And so every area has their distinct terroir of what they're growing in. If they're growing in hard bedrock or limestone or whatever, I mean, that's what really distinguishes an area and sets it apart from something else. We certainly have slope in our area. The cliff face obviously is the high end of the Niagara Escarpment, but the Niagara Cuesta, which is the long landform that goes back toward Lake Michigan, has got a 15-degree slope. That's that does two things basically. Gives us very good drainage, because grapes don't like what? Thank you. And we have wind. So it's constantly draining that air, draining that water, yes? So that's a good thing for grapes. So I'm sure you have the same elevations, another thing. So typically our site is not the best site in the world. We didn't choose it to be a winery and a vineyard. We evolved into that. But if you're going to do grapes, a southwest sloping hill, slightly, you've got southern exposure, you've got some nice till, that would be perfect for growing grapes. Like I said, we don't use the kinds of grapes that you have to lay down and bury in the ground every year, like the vinifera's, like some of the people do in Michigan. We don't do that. I'm like pretty hard about that. Either you're going to survive or you're not. So the grapes that we plant certainly are grapes that survive, through the harsh weather. Again, grapes don't like wet feet, so we talked about that. The kind of grapes that we grow certainly are the Frontenac, the Marquette, Frontenac Gris, and St. Croix. These are all grapes that the University of Minnesota and Elmer Swenson, if you ever heard of Elmer Swenson, he's a grape hybridizer from the western part of the state of Wisconsin. He worked with the University of Minnesota on hybridizing the grapes. So what these grapes do is They're hardy. They have a hardy rootstock, but they give you a good taste of for making wine. And so that was very important for us to grow the right cultivars. When we first started, some of these varieties weren't even available. So, I mean, we've torn out the vineyard probably 5 or 6 times overall and replanted and just improved the crop. But I mean, that's what you have to do to have the best type of grape that you want to plant. They're hardy grapes, so they're good to -30. So obviously, that's a good thing. We try to stay as green as possible when we have our vineyard in our vineyard. There's certainly some things that you have to do, but we are very conscious about pesticides and fungicides because we are also a trout hatchery. And so any drift of that gets in my trout pond, and guess what? I'm cleaning up white bellies because that's all I see, because trout are very susceptible to anything like that. So we are very, very cognizant about that type of thing. We might spray early in the year for under trellis to keep some of the weeds down, but the rest of the year, pretty much that's it. There's no other spray program. There are things that you can use. We have tried sheep. We brought in 2 Southdown baby doll sheep from California, because that's what they use out there. We call them Fred and Barney. Fred and Barney didn't work out. It was great until the grapes started to ripen, and Fred said, I'm eating grapes. And of course, Barney followed. We had to get rid of Fred and Barney. So that didn't work. But there certainly are things that do work, okay? So you can see that there's chickens in the picture. We do have a flock of chickens, which you'll meet in a little while. So that does work. So there certainly are things that you can do. Growing grapes is not a cheap proposition, okay? But again, it depends upon how much work you want to do yourself, okay? Establishing costs roughly for an acre of vineyard, I've kind of listed it out. The plants, the spacing, between the plants. Typically at Trout Springs, our rows are 10 feet apart, and about every 5 or 6 feet we plant a grape plant. You certainly can go farther, but we only have 5 acres, and so we plant as many as we can into a small area to get as much as we can. Trellising, obviously, it's an investment. I mean, you've got you've got tons and tons of grapes that are hanging on this trellising. And so you can't just use some wire that you get at the hardware store. It's not going to work, okay? You have tensioners, you have land anchors. It's definitely a structure that you have to build out there. If you don't, your grape, first good windstorm come along, it's all going to fall down, okay? So you don't want that. In addition to that, you have maintenance costs with your pruning and all that good stuff, your tractor and fuel, and that's not even talking about labor. The types of trellising certainly you have different kinds of trellising. Some grapes do better on systems that are basically open in the middle. That's called like the umbrella niffin. But ours are basically just a straight 2-wire niffin vertical system, where you put the grapes, basically the main trunk comes up, and you overlay the cordons on either side, or you run them vertically. Either way it works. But the thing about grapes is, this is another thing I learned the hard way, is that if you don't prune the living crap out of them every year, guess what? You're not going to get any grapes. Because you know why? Huh? They think life is good. Why produce fruit? You got to kill them. You got to try to kill them. So you got to prune them. You can see that in the center picture where it shows the winter in the 3rd season. That's what it looks like in the fall. So in the spring, you have to pretty much take everything off that grape and trick it into thinking that it's dying. Then next year it produces fruit. It's a strange animal, but you get used to it, okay? Along with the vineyard stuff is certainly the winery costs. So you have to have a fermentation room where you actually ferment the wine. You have to have a tasting room where the customers come in, certainly a wine lab, a restroom, event room. These are not cheap items, but again, here's the key to it all. When you start out, crawl before you walk. Okay, just don't, you can spend $1 million real easy. Banks will probably give you the money, right? But you got to make those payments. It took us 10 years to build our winery. It took us 10 years to pay for our equipment. So when the day we opened our doors, we were debt free. And we remain that way. But the idea is, if you get to that point, go about it slowly and buy what you can. You can't have everything the first year. So you do it as you can, and that is certainly the key. There's equipment like, your barrels, your tanks. We buy wine barrels. Every year we have to buy wine barrels. Those wine barrels average about $800 a barrel. And you only get 3 years use out of that barrel. That's the amount of charring and oak and toast and smoke and cassis and all the good stuff that's in there when you age a red wine. So you're constantly recycling barrels, and you're constantly moving wine from tank to tank. So, and these is all specialty equipment. This, crusher destemmers, wine presses, bottle fillers. You can't just go to Fleet Farm and get some of this stuff if it breaks down. It's not going to work. Okay, this is all stuff that comes from Italy, and it certainly is very important. Some of the health benefits. I don't look at wine as a drink. I look at it as a food. Wine helps you digest your food, and that's one of the leading things that are certainly in wine is this enzyme, naturally occurring, called resveratrol. What does it do? Help prevent against heart disease and high blood pressure. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with high blood pressure, about somewhere in the 220 range over 1 something, and they said, you're about ready to have a heart attack. So they put me on some stuff, right? So I took it for about a month. Didn't seem to work, plus it caused other problems down south. And, okay, I'm sorry, but I'm not going through that, okay? So I stopped taking it, and other people had been taking our product that we make from this, which is our grape powder, and so I did. A month later, I was down to 138 over 80. And I got off my meds, and the southern region has gotten a lot happier, I'll tell you that. So everything's back to normal. But there's some other foods here that we talk about. The red wine certainly has the resveratrol in it. You can see that's probably one of the largest concentrations of that. You've heard of the French paradox, right? The French people eat the richest food, yet they have the least amount of coronary problems. Why is that? Because they're drinking red wine to help them digest their food. It's a good thing. Some of the things we also do is we do ice wine. We press our frozen grapes. We pick frozen, press frozen. This was last year's crop. We took 1,000 pounds. We got 30 gallons. So you can see it's a slow drip, drip, drip. And you get, that's how long it takes. But it's a very special kind of wine if you've ever had it. It's certainly fun to make. There's our chickens. There's our coop right in the vineyard, and of course our 2 corgis, Casey and Morgan, and they're the mascots of the place. They think they own the place. But again, the chickens serve a purpose. They eat the bugs in the vineyard, helps keep our spray pattern down, and they also lay blue eggs. And people think, well, it's because they're eating all those grapes, right? No, that's not why they're Americanas. It's the only chicken that lays a blue egg. But it's a good story for the winery. I'm going to tell you that right now. We sell a boatload of them. So this is the front of the freeze dryer. You can see the product that we actually take the mash from the skins and seeds. We put that in the freeze dryer that I designed and made. You have 3 things going on. You have a vacuum. You have a little bit of heat and a little bit of cold. And what happens when heat meets cold? Condensation. Condensation, thank you. So when it condensates on the back coil, that water that's squeezed out of those grapes is frozen on the back of that coil. Hence, we can freeze dry that product without taking all the good stuff out of it, right? We keep it at 30 degrees all the time. So I put in 84 pounds of wet product, 18 pounds of dry product comes out, and what it looks like is this right here. So you have raw skins and seeds, right? Now you can't really, you can eat that, but it's going to be pretty crunchy, right? So you don't want to eat that. So what we do is we put it into capsules. There's my capsule making table. We have a little commercial grinder that we grind it up into a fine powder. As we grind it up, it turns into this powder that goes into through a sifter, takes it down to about 0.70 microns. And then I'm looking like a crack cocaine guy right there. I'm filling my capsules. Okay, so you take all that powder and you put it in the little capsules and you put them together. And of course you have the loaded capsules. You can do about 100 capsules in about 4 minutes. And of course that's the product that we do with that. It's ironic, we used to throw that out into the vineyard, but now we use that and sell it to a lot of people. We use 100% of the product. So along with putting it in the capsules, we do the Healthy Choice Cheddar, some of which you had last night, and you will have again, I believe, coming up, along with some wines. And so again, 6 ounces of this is like drinking a 6 ounce glass of red wine. So it's all good, so you can feel good about eating cheese for once. Okay, so that's why we do it. Along with the cheese, we do the wine bars. We have a chocolatier that puts our powder in this high flavanol wine bar, and it's got Pop Rocks in it too, just for the heck of it. It's interesting, it's kind of fun. But 3 glasses of wine in each wine bar, and you also have truffles that we do. And so all of these things combined together, make up the value-added products that we grow on the Niagara Escarpment. Okay, I've always said if you do the right things for the right reasons, you will be rewarded. We were surprised, my wife and I, to be nominated as the 2012 Winery of the Year, which we gladly accepted. It kind of reminded me last night about the Leopold story. You know, how he said, if you plant a tree, you can leave this place a better place. You don't have to plant a tree, plant a vine. And you leave this place a better place. Thank you.